Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is a two-part series by the incredible mind of RevBlackRage over on Reddit. As ever, please do let me know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help with the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story, entitled, As a Marine, I too have seen weird shit in the Marine Corps. Let's get straight into that. I was reading 035 Non's post about his experiences with weird shit in the Marine Corps. Figured I might share one of my experiences, of which I have a few. This was back in 2006 or 2007. Our battalion was experiencing a rash of break-ins at our ramp. Ramp being a fancy term for a tactical parking lot, where we park armoured vehicles. Why would you break into a ramp? There was a maintenance bay, with millions of dollars in tools and a bunch of high-speed training aids, like 70-inch televisions. This was in part of Camp Lejeune, known as Courthouse Bay. The history behind the name is that before the US Marine Corps bought the land from North Carolina, the county courthouse was in that neck of the woods. The courthouse itself stood where our barracks were, and across the bay where our ramp was, is where the gallows stood. A ramp guard was posted due to the thefts, sets of 2 men on 8-hour shifts, plus a corporal of the guard who wasn't on the ramp, but up in the barracks. Me and my post body drew rifles and relieved the guys on guard. This was about 2200 or 10 at night. Hey, stay frosty. The kid is out playing tonight. The COG passed along during relief. The kid, Corporal? I asked. Whose kid? He just grinned and said, Call me, if you need me. There were 2 positions on ramp guard, box guy and rover. Box sat next to the road, and the rover rovered the area. We weren't the only unit in Courthouse Bay. At the time, there was a combat engineer school, MARSOC, the Coast Guard Special Operations Training Command, and Force Recon. We kept our eye on any assets they had on that side of the bay, as a professional courtesy. I took the first walk around as rover, and that's when I got the first witness. I was walking back amongst our vehicles, and I kept hearing bangs from inside the vehicles, and occasionally what sounded like tools being thrown across the ramp. I never found anything when I went to look. Side note, the Marine Corps has always been short on funds. It's like a service tradition. So when one of our vehicles gets blown up or sunk, the vehicle is recovered and anything salvageable is taken off the vehicle and put into rotation as spare parts or equipment. That sledgehammer with weird scorch marks on the shaft, it was pried out of the hands of a dead Marine who was holding on to it when his vehicle got blown up. That final drive we pulled out of supply, it's got a weird pull to it when it drives. It was on the track that sunk in the bay. The one that took 5 Marines to their death. It was always a joke about the vehicles being haunted, and so I played it off. Was he going to call the corporal of the guard over some nonsense? So I walk into my post in a military manner and trying to keep the cold at bay and trying not to freak out at the same time. I walk around back to the box and took my turn as the guy in the box. About 15 minutes into my box rotation, my cell phone lights up. And it's my watch buddy.
Hey man, you're a fucking hoot, but that shit is creeping me out. Knock it off.
I asked him what the fuck he was talking about. He grunted over the phone and told me to knock it off, and then hung up. I looked at my phone not knowing what the fuck he was talking about. I shrugged and shoved my phone back into my pocket. He came back around to the box about 15 minutes later. What the fuck are you talking about, man? I bluntly asked him. Apparently, he had heard a giggle when he was walking along the tree line on the far side of the ramp, like 2 or 3 times. I called him a retard, as people do in the military, and took my turn to walk. First place I went to was the tree line, because I was planning on checking it out and making fun of him for being a pussy. It was dark back there. The stars were bright and there was a full moon out, but back along that tree line, I was darker than shit. I was walking along it, not really paying attention, when I heard a twig snap inside the trees. I turned around and brought my rifle up. Bullshit guard duty or not, there were still bears in North Carolina, and I didn't plan on getting eaten by one. I didn't know what a 5.56 would do to a black bear, but I had 30 chances to find out, and I was willing to go on a journey of discovery. I looked into the trees directly in front of me. It was damn near pitch darkness. I started to get that creepy feeling you get when you were watched, like the shadows were staring back. I backed up a few steps. Nothing happened. I waited a few more heartbeats, just staring at the shadows with my rifle at the ready. And that's when I caught movement. I was about 3 feet tall, maybe 4, but that's all I could make out. It stood looking in my direction for a few seconds, and from about 10 feet inside the tree line, my eyes adjusted a little, and I could make out the vague outline of a person. A kid or a midget or something. It continued, doing nothing, and then just like that, it turned and moved off. It looked like it got about 3 feet and just fully disappeared into the shadows. Like ceased to exist type disappeared. I stood watching for a moment, trying to rationalize what I had seen. Hog, maybe. Recon guys out fucking with us? That had happened before. There used to be a pretty bad rivalry between us and them. Not a professional one, either. Just 2 tribes of testosterone-charged guys in their early 20s. Tribal conflict was inevitable, but that was pretty chilled out now. Maybe I had imagined it. Probably had. Nothing will fuck with you like your own imagination. I returned to walking my post, but kept glancing over my shoulder. I kept telling myself that it was my imagination, nothing more, nothing less. Couldn't shake it though. I made my way back to the box and did a turn over. My watch body seemed a little withdrawn, yet kind of wired, almost jumpy. I asked him if everything was alright, and he told me he felt like he was being watched the entire time, and it was freaking him out. I told him about the shadow at the tree line, and he looked at me with genuine fear in his eyes. We agreed not to go back there again for the rest of the night. I offered him a smoke and he took it. He mostly hung around within sight of the box during his rove. When it came time to shift from box guy to rover, my body was a bundle of nerves, but I was still cool to rove. I had a loaded rifle and body armor, and at this point in the military career, I still thought I was invincible. And so I went to rove. I wandered back down towards Motor T and the Coast Guard docks behind the building. That feeling of being watched popped up on my radar again. I looked out towards the concrete dock. Something was off. I couldn't tell what it was until it moved. The top of what looked like a head dropped down beneath the hedge of the closest dock. Like someone had been poking their head up and over the edge of the dock and was just watching me. I would like to say that I was a total badass here, but I raised my rifle and started ordering it into the light. I did no such thing. I stood frozen, a sort of fearful indecision stopping me in my tracks. I heard something splash out in the water, just the far side of the dock that I was watching. Something poked out in my mind. It was my duty to figure this out. It was my duty to walk out there and look down in that water. Another splash in the water, and this time I could see water splashing up and onto the dock itself. The splashing was getting bigger, like some fisherman had reeled in a shark with plenty of fight left in it. I did a brush check on my rifle, I did my best to steady my nerves. I made a fist and knocked the chest of my body armor, just to make sure it was still there. I was still religious at the time, so I may have muttered a prayer or two. I took one step forward, and I heard it. A sing-song giggle floated on the winter breeze. I heard it as soon as my boot hit concrete. Nope. That was enough to dissuade me of any desire to look into that water. Some hard-ass Marine I was. I turned on my heels and booked it to the perceived safety of the Connect box. I think I ran the quarter-mile to the box in, well, it may not have been a record, but it was fucking fast. As soon as I got there, I noticed that the box was closed. I called out for my post body and the doors on the box creaked open. I asked him what he was doing in there. He shrugged half-heartedly and said something about it feeling safer. I nodded. I understood. He asked me for a smoke and I realized I needed one too. As I was fishing out my pack, I brought up calling the corporal of the guard. And say what? Shit's creepy, he shot back, nerves in his voice. He had a point. I popped the smoke in my mouth and lit it. I held out my lighter to light his smoke. He leaned in, cigarette first, and froze just as he was about to light up, his eyes suddenly wide, staring over my shoulder. I sighed. I knew I was going to turn around and there was going to be some weird shit behind me. And I remember thinking, let's get it over with. I turned around and there was in fact some weird shit behind me. It was a child, a little girl, standing about 100 yards up in dead center of the road. And she was dressed in a white dress, an older style white dress, like the kind you see on little girls in old cowboy movies. If you're thinking something along the lines of the girl from The Ring, I'm sorry to disappoint, but she looked normal, like she was pulled out of a Rockwell painting. Well, except for her eyes. Those were made evil. I can't even describe them, except to say they had no place in a child's head. When I looked into her eyes, I felt the hate in my soul, and it was fucking chilling. I once looked into the eyes of a Wahhabist jihadi, and he had bled out from a chest wound. That amount of hate in his eyes was the only thing I've ever seen come close to that child's eyes. I looked at my body, and he looked back to me, and neither of us knew what to do. We just knew that this shit, it was wrong. The child started walking towards us. Oh, fuck! My body muttered breathlessly, and to be fair, that was a valid point at the time. The giggle floated across the wind again, but it didn't stop this time. It was like it was on a loop, but each time it replayed, it was slightly different. At one point it was a higher pitch, at another point it was a lower pitch, mixed with those eyes that never broke contact. It was very disconcerting. I started to get dizzy as she moved closer. The edges of my vision started to dim and started pushing in towards the center, and she was getting closer. I tried to bring up my rifle and drill the little shit right between those creepy ass eyes, but my arms wouldn't cooperate, and she came closer. I tried to move backwards, but my legs wouldn't play ball, and she came closer. I tried to tell my body to get the fuck out of here, but my mouth wouldn't do its thing. And she was almost there when I saw it turn down the street. Salvation rides in a 2003 Chevy passenger van. As soon as the headlights lit her up, she was gone, and I could move again. I demonstrated this by falling to my knees and gasping. I instantly felt like I had a motherfucker of a hangover. The van rolled up to us and the passenger door swinging open. Your boots okay? It was the corporal of the guard. I responded by vomiting, and the COG chuckled. I told you, the kid was out playing tonight. I too have seen weird shit in the Marine Corps. Part 2. The Range. Let's get straight into that. This was a couple of years after that night on the ramp, so 2008 or 2009. It was about 0330 or 3:30 in the morning. Why we were up at such a godforsaken hour? We had a vehicle gunnery range that day, and the Marine Corps likes to start early. We were at the ramp, and no, the kid was not out playing that night. Morning. Whatever. We were prepping the vehicles to move to the range. The vehicles in question were AAVP 7A1 Ram RSs. Big old tracked amphibious people haulers. Been around since the 70s, but continuously upgraded. They could take Marines to the beach from a ship, drive up the beach, drop the arse end of the vehicle, disgorge 24 Marines and fight alongside them, providing heavy machine gun support. Sounds pretty fucking cool, right? Total death traps though. Aluminium skin and flat bottom. Make them fairly vulnerable to, shit, just about everything. I tried to include a picture of one. I was sitting in the back of the vehicle I rode on, trying to will myself to wake up some more, just a little more. The back of the vehicle was down and I was watching the Marines in my section prep their vehicles. My driver walked over to the back of the vehicle and stood before me. "Hey, Corporal," he said in that soft, spoken way that most boots have about them when speaking to someone who outranks them. "What's up, fuckface?" I asked, putting my lack of ability to be a morning person on full display. "You done prepping this bitch?" "Yes, Corporal," he said, pulling out a can of Cope, long cut. He offered me a pinch out of the can out of sheer politeness, or being a suck-ass. I could not tell. I shook my head no, and the boot pulled a pinch for himself and packed it into his lip. "You hear about Bag of Dick's wife?" I had not in fact heard the current scuttlebutt on Bag of Dick's wife. I should clear up that Bag of Dick's was in fact a Marine in our platoon. Also that Bag of Dick's was also a misleading, affectionate appellation. Bag was a good guy, but he was hands down the worst Marine to ever squeak out of boot camp. He wasn't malicious in his shitbaggery, and he wasn't a go-to, the brick kind of shitbag either. He was just a guy who couldn't get his head around the Marine Corps. Messed up ranks were talking to higher-ups, dicked up uniform, shitty time management skills, that kind of stuff. Real, give it a shirt off his back kind of dude though. Somebody gets fucked up at PT, and he was the first one trying to render body aid. Poorly, but still trying. One of the boots gets bad news from home. He was the first to sit and listen to them vent. Just the kind of dude he was. Don't get me wrong, we smoked the fuck out of him when he fucked up, but there was no real malice in it. Nothing personal, as they say. Just a desire to help this kid get right. His wife was a stripper at Sherry's Gentleman's Club, out on the back gate. Awful Marine, typical boot though. I looked over at the Marine standing next to another AAV, or track, in our section. I could see him looking at his phone in the morning darkness. I could tell he was anxious, just from his body language. I looked back at my driver. "They have a fight or something?" I asked, before burning my lips with shitty coffee. "Nah, Corporal," my driver said, around a huge plug of chew. "She didn't come home last night, not answering her phone either." I leaned back in my seat and looked over at Bag. Well, that sucked. I watched for a minute more. I watched him try to call his wife one more time. He held the phone to his ear, but eventually his shoulders slumped and he pulled the phone away from his ear. I looked over at my driver. "Grab Dungeon Monkey and get the guns mounted," I said. "I'll be back." In case you're wondering, the Dungeon Monkey is the rear crewman who rides down in the troop compartment, or dungeon. And some folks call their rear crewman the Dungeon Master. I, however, think Dungeon Monkey sounds funnier. I got out my seat and moseyed on down a few tracks to where Bag was still staring intently at his phone, like he was willing it to ring. The grip he had on that thing was damn near about to crush it. "Your hog ready to go, Bag?" I asked. Bag looked over at me, eyes filled with anxiety, and nodded. Now normally, Marine Corps customs and courtesies dictated that he'd say something along the lines of, "Yes, Corporal." Maybe something like, "Hoorah, Corporal," or some other such overly motivated nonsense bullshit. But like I said, Bag of Dicks had a problem wrapping his head around the Marine Corps. I was well within my rights as a non-commissioned officer to rip out his heart and eat his soul. But I wasn't there for that, and on top of that, it just wasn't really my style. I stood looking at him for a sec before I said, "You alright, Bag?" He looked down at his phone and then back up at me. "My wife never made it home from work," he said, his voice soaking with worry. "She wasn't there when I woke up, and she usually calls me if she's going to stay at a girlfriend's house or if she goes home with a guy." Well, maybe her phone. I started to console before the full gravity of what he said hit me. Hold the fuck up. Did you just say if she goes home with a guy?" He looked up at me, a terrified look on his face. Like he had just said too much. Maybe he hadn't. Maybe he had. Who the fuck am I to judge? That's kind of how we have things set up." He responded with a whole lot of timid in his voice. "I do the same thing. Not with guys, well, not that I'm opposed." "Stop talking." I cut him off. We were getting too deep into the weeds on this one, and I was just not equipped to deal with it, or what he was putting down. Not to mention that fucking a stranger, while married and falling under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, meant brig time, and loss of rank and pay. No shit neither. The UCMJ was written in like 1899 or something, and updated like every other century or so. Oral sex, given or receiving, can technically get you brig time. It's in there, so it's still enforceable. Fucking Puritans. He just admitted to something that I was supposed to nail his ass to the wall for. I took a minute to realign my thought process, took a sip of my shitty coffee, and said, "Shit, dude. Maybe her phone died. Maybe she just got caught up in what she was doing. Let's not freak out." I said in my best impression of a soothing tone. "If we haven't heard from her by noon, I'll try and get you off the range early, so you can go check up on her. We just need to get through the movement. Can we do that?" Bag looked down at his phone, then back up at me. "Yeah, I think I can handle that, Corporal." I put a hand on his shoulder and said, "Shit's probably okay, Bag. Real big brother shit. That's half the job of an NCO, anyway." On my way back to the hog, I passed Bag's crew chief who was dragging his gear in. He had missed the accountability formation at 0230. Our section leader was most likely going to chew his ass out for being late, maybe smoke him, but it would be done in private, away from the eyes of the junior Marines. "Nice of you to join us, bro," I called out to him, and he dropped his pack, spun around and gave me a dual middle fingers with a shit-eating grin. He looked like he was still a little drunk from the night before. I remember feeling annoyed with my fellow NCO, but it was a transgression of which I was not innocent of. Not this morning, but in the past at least. "Hey, Bag is having an issue. Talk to him about what I told him." He waved over his shoulder and kept it pushing. I had just lit up a smoke when my section leader called out, telling us to mount up, and we would be pushing out soon. It briefly occurred to me that Bag had gotten his track ready to roll without adult supervision. I remember thinking that maybe there was a hope for that kid. And we did a comms check and lined the vehicles up at the back gate of the ramp.
"Hey, Corporal."
My driver's voice crackled over the CVC helmet.
"I think I just saw someone in the tree line."
I felt a pinprick of ice run down my spine. "Don't worry about it," I said. "We're about to push out, and I don't think she'll follow us." I could see my driver's head poking out of his hatch, turn and look up at me in the turret. I could tell from the tilt in his head that he had no idea what I was talking about. I could see him reaching up to his helmet to push the talk switch. "I said, don't worry about it, fucker." I snapped at him before he could let out. I turned and concentrated on the tail lights of the vehicle in front of me. I wasn't as creeped out by the little girl as maybe I had once been. I mean, shit. I worked on the ramp, but still, I wasn't eager to see her again. I looked down at the dungeon monkey, through the open cargo hatch on the roof, and held out my fist, thumb extended sideways. He looked back up at me, mirrored my gesture, and turned his thumb skywards, which meant nothing was currently on fire in the dungeon. The box he plugged his helmet into was fucked up so he couldn't talk over the inner vehicle comms, mute but not deaf. I reached up and keyed my helmet out. "Let's wake this bitch up and go shoot some guns, boys," I said, my voice a little more steady than before. Part of me being an NCO is saying cool shit in an effort to make the guys feel like badasses. I do okay at it. I felt my driver shift the track into gear. The track jolts when it shifts into gear from park, kind of like when you are fake throwing a ball for a dog. And he starts to run but stops after a step, watching you, because he knows you are a lying sack of shit. When a 903 cubic inch turbo diesel engine starts pushing 26 tons of twisted steel and sex appeal, oh, it's loud. It's like a Valkyrie with a 2-pack-a-day habit screaming in your ear. I miss it. I honestly do. The Marine Corps recently started phasing out the AAVs for some amphibious Italian armoured car. It will never be as sexy as an AAV. We were just about to reach the first intersection of tank trail and road when it came over the platoon net.
Our Vix, this is Bone Crusher,"
the section leader on the lead track said over the radio.
"Be advised, we have movement on the deck. Someone just moved into the trees off the left side of the tank trail. Didn't get good eyes on them, but keep an eye out. Don't crunch. No crunchies."
Grunts call everyone who isn't a grunt a POG, person other than a grunt. Trackers call everyone who isn't a tracker a crunchy, because people crunch when you drive over them. Marine Corps humour is pretty complex. The track started rogering up that they had copied. I didn't bother. I felt a knot started to form in my stomach, and I grimaced to myself. I know there was going to be some weird shit that day. I felt it in my bones. We made the first road crossing, where the tank trail crossed over the road, which is actually a bit of a process. You have to push out road guards to stop traffic and then clean up the crossing afterwards. Tracked vehicles sling a lot of mud, and the Marine Corps likes shit tidy. The 2nd Tank Battalion used to just shoot across the road without pushing out road guards, even though it was ape law in the Marine Corps. They got away with it too until the captain was speeding down 5 Mile Road at 1 in the morning. If you've ever wondered what a M1A1 Abrams main battle tank would do to a Ford Fiesta, the answer is a lot. That little red car hit that tank at 80 miles an hour. It crushed itself and pulverized that captain. They were pulling pieces of him out of that wreckage, and not big ones either. I heard somewhere that the back axle of the car had actually come through the front seat. They built Ford tough, but it don't got shit on reactive armor. As we were crossing the road, I saw movement in the trees across the road. I focused on the area and saw nothing more. I didn't bother calling it up because it could have been anything, and it wasn't worth tying up the net with. As we pushed up the tank trail, I noticed a general slowdown in a procession of vehicles. We were still too far off from the next road crossing for there to be any reason for it.
"Megatron to Bone Crusher."
Our platoon sergeant called out to the section leader riding on track 1.
"Why are we slowing down?"
It's not us, Megatron. We are cruising," Bone Crusher replied. "Track 9 to Megatron." Addict's crew chief came across the radio, slight slur in his voice. "It's us. My driver lost his balls, probably why his wife left him. We're picking it back up." I remember getting pissed at my fellow NCO for that, putting his guy's personal shit out into the air like that, and giving him shit for it. Addicts was a shitbag, yes, but he still was a Marine and a man. That sort of thing would fuck with a kid's confidence, not to mention his already shot nerves. Not a thing that you wanted on a day when you were going to put him in control of belt-fed weapons. I leaned back in my turret and lit a smoke. Without looking, I shoved my lighter into the pack and threw it down to Dungeon Monkey through the cargo hatch. I knew he was going to ask for one. I swear, I was the only motherfucker who bought smokes in that platoon. I took a drag.
"Hey, Corporal,"
said my driver, his voice in my ear.
"I swear I saw something move in the woods again. Like it was moving alongside us."
"Dude, watch the fucking road," I said. "Don't worry about the woods. That's my job." I was trying to give him something else to focus on, like his job or something. The fact of the matter was that I could use something else to focus on as well. I looked at the track in front of me. Its crew chief and its version of Dungeon Monkey were both hanging out of their respective hatches and pointing at something in the woods. Fucking great, I muttered. We were being shadowed by something. That much was clear. I didn't think it was the little girl, but to be fair, a lot of shit I think is pretty fucking dumb. We were getting closer to the range and the sun was starting to brighten up the sky. Bright pinks and oranges crept over the horizon. I felt a little better, knowing the sun was coming out. I don't know why. There's plenty of weird shit in the sunlight too. Unfortunately, when we broke the tree line right before the last road crossing into the range itself, I was fogged out. Like seriously, fucking fogged out. Not like London fog where you can't see your balls, but it wasn't that far from it either. My body tightened up reflexively as we drove into it. Felt like we were driving into a wall. I remember thinking at the time that it was like the fog was waiting to ambush us as we exited the woods. That fog was a real foreboding motherfucker. I hated when we had to do road crossings in low visibility. Pushed the guys on deck in a lot of danger. But we managed to get through it without anyone getting crushed or run over and pulled onto the range itself. We stopped and put out ground guides on the vehicles, one in front and one in back, to guide the track in tight or dangerous spots. A deep fog bank would count as a dangerous spot, and I was on the deck in front of my track. I could barely make out Dungeon Monkey 20 feet away at the back of the track, until he snapped a chem light, a red one. The red light reflecting off the fog and bathing a stocky marine in full body armor with a colour red and shadows that made him look otherworldly, like a battle dwarf from hell. He snapped another chem light and tossed it to me. And that was a good idea. We could see each other now, since our flashlights had been made in the 80s and stopped working in the 90s. Dungeon Monkey was pretty smart for someone from Georgia, as I was fond of telling him. We moved the vehicles up to their firing points and dropped the back ramps. My driver and the Dungeon Monkey joined me at the back of the vehicle. "How did she do?" I asked, inquiring about the mechanical integrity of the vehicle. "Good to go, Corporal," my driver said, looking around the fog bank that was now our world. "I didn't smell nothing on fire," said the Dungeon Monkey, holding out the pack of smokes I had thrown at him earlier. He too appeared to be lost in the fog, just looking around. Something had him concerned. My driver was a typical blank-faced boot, but Dungeon Monkey wore his emotions like a cheap suit. "All right, get her checked out and get the guns nice and juicy." And neither of them responded, still lost in the fog. I gave them a moment to respond before I did my best to pierce the fog. "Hey, dickheads," I said, putting some bass into my voice. "Sorry, Corporal," said my driver, shaking his head like he was trying to shake the fog out. "Shit feels weird out here, Corp," proclaimed the Dungeon Monkey. My driver nodded in agreement. He wasn't wrong. Shit did in fact feel weird out here. I felt it too. You know that feeling you get when something bad is about to happen? Yeah, I fucking felt it. But I was still Corporal of the Marines, and so I had to put my dickhead hat on. "You two are gonna feel fucking weird on balls to full watch if you don't get my goddamn tractor checked out," I threatened. They didn't quite scatter, but they did move, the driver heading up the ramp into the vehicle, Dungeon Monkey walking around the suspension, looking for obvious damage or any leaks. When I looked around the range, the fog seemed like it had pushed in at us a little. May have been a trick of the mind, but it sure as shit didn't feel like it. I saw my section leader walking up to the back of Megatron's vehicle. Figured that might be a good place to get some word, and so I followed him. "Fellas, we ain't doing shit of this stuff," Megatron preached to the section leaders and a couple of random crew chiefs. "All we need is for one of the boys to light off the Mark 19 in the wrong direction, or too close, and we are fucking done, son. Communists, NJPs, everybody getting one." A couple of the Marines present chuckled. I looked around to the assemblage, and I was noticing a lot of apprehensive body language. Marines by nature, square-shouldered beasts, filled with bravado and confidence. Out here, I was seeing a lot of hunched-up shoulders and crossed arms. A few concerned faces. Everyone was feeling it. The weird in the air. I was considering commenting on it, but as an E4 sitting in on an E5 through E7 meeting, I was the council, but not granted the rank of master, and so I held my peace. "Check out the hogs, juice the guns, and feed the boys. Do not break out the ammo. We're gonna wait this shit out. So saith Megatron, so saith the law." After Megatron's sermon, the congregation broke up to spread his gospel. I fell in step beside my section leader. "You see anybody in the woods on the way in?" he asked me as we walked. "Yeah," I said. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up like saying it out loud had just made things worse. The air felt like it got heavier. I don't know why. My crew saw it too. I think they are spooked. We didn't get a good look at them, but my driver said he saw something shadowing us in the woods. My section leader slowly shook his head, more in an exasperated way. "I fucking hate this place," he mumbled. "You know, we found bodies on this range before." "No shit?" I asked. "Yeah, I was a lance at the time," he said, launching into a story. "And I'm sitting on the old turret, dumping a 40 mic into that old tank at the 1,000-yard line. I see something fly off it. Ceasefire gets called. I poke my head out. My RSO was standing behind my turret, looking down the range with his binos. Had a real befuddled look on his face. Turns out that some recon douchebag had got him back from deployment, and his wife had been cheating on him the whole time with different dudes. And so he kills her, tracks down the Jolies, kills them, and buries them all on the 1,000-yard line. Shallow grave behind that tank. What I had seen flying up, well, it was a torso. I had dug them up with 40 mic. It showed me a picture of the graveside. HEDP grenades to a number on bodies. Shit fucked with me for a little while. Kept having this dream that they hadn't been dead, just chained down, watching 50 cal tracers ping off the tank. And then hearing that Mark 19 going off before just ceasing to exist. Shit, still have that dream sometimes. Holy shit, was all the response that I could muster. Just holy shit, boss. Sometimes therapy of the Marine Corps is actually just dumping a wild-ass story on someone, just to get it out of you. That douchebag is still in Leavenworth, my section leader went on. Last I heard, waiting his turn to ride the lightning. Some fucked up people in this world. Not every monster lurks in the dark. Speaking of douchebags, I was about to bring up Addict's crew chief and his poor leadership choices when my section leader stopped short. I looked over at him, and he was staring into the fog. I followed his gaze, and there was something moving in the fog. A shadow. I squinted, trying to get a better look. It was a person. Whoever they weren't wearing body armor or marine uniform. I remember a feeling of dread washing over me. My body started to tense up. I remember the tips of my boots digging into the soil, like I was about to make a break for it. Total fight or flight reaction. And there was some dark, heavy shit coming through the fog. As it came closer to us, in the fog, it started to reveal more details about our visitor. I was a little ashamed that I recognized her as the stripper from Sherry's before I recognized her as Bag Addict's wife. I had met her in both capacities, but Bag sure as shit recognized her as his wife, as the anguished wail from that direction of the tracks behind us attested to that fact. It was her, and she was mangled. All of her fingers bent the wrong way, her right elbow was broken outwards, and her arm dangled, useless, at her side. Her throat was torn open. I would say slashed, but shit, that's just not a strong enough word for it. Her face was battered, cheekbones broken, lips split open, and eyes blackened. The sort of punishment you see in old pictures of lynchings. It was fucking brutal. Her eyes were dead, no emotion, no spark of life. She looked like a walking corpse, or at least to me, she did. I noticed that her feet and calves were covered in mud. Odd thing to notice, but I did. Bag shot past us running to her. That snapped me out of it. I shouted for a corpsman as I started to walk towards her. I would have run, but that primal lizard brain of mine was still telling me to get the fuck out of there. This shit, it wasn't right. My section leader listened to his instincts and stayed back. I really don't judge him for that. There was no way this woman should still be alive. I got no closer than 15 feet before I could take another step. Whether it was on my own cowardice or something else stopping me, I couldn't say. But Bag got to her though. Nothing held him back, and as soon as he reached her, she collapsed. He went down with her. He put his arms around her, around his wife, and pulled her in close. He started to sob, rocking her back and forth in his arms. And I noticed that despite her brutalized body being covered in wet blood, none soaked into Bag's uniform. Strange detail to notice, but I did. The mental image of this sobbing Marine cradling his battered wife stuck with me through the years. It was quite possibly the most distressing thing I have ever seen. I realized he was speaking to her, but I could not understand what he was saying. I noticed that her lips were moving too, but her words, they were not for me. A silent conversation. I felt more than saw our platoon's corpsman coming up beside me. He made it about 2 steps farther than I did. He seemed to be fighting it though, trying to push through whatever was holding him back. His teeth were grinding into themselves and a vein was popping out of his neck. Corpsmen don't quit when a life is on the line, weird shit or not. If we were out there for 1,000 more years, Doc would have fought to get to that woman the entire time. But he never would have made it on time, for more reasons than one. The woman gave Bags a smile, and that was the only time her eyes lit back up. That smile, amongst the backdrop, it was oddly soothing, like a spot of light in a sea of pitch, darkness, and bullshit. I felt dread in the air pull back a little. She reached up with a good arm, her smile melting into a warm grin, and ran a twisted finger down Bag's face, wiping away some of his tears. The palm of her mangled hand came to rest on his cheek. It was oddly tender, given the circumstances. Bags had loved his wife, and she had loved him right back. She drew back a bit and looked him in the eyes. The light died from hers, and the tenderness was gone. I've seen guys walk out of rooms full of dead bodies with more sunshine to their disposition, and I felt the tension in the air ratchet up a couple of notches. The air felt like it got thicker. I just knew this shit, I was about to get dumber. Bags locked eyes with her. He leaned in and rested his forehead against hers. He closed his eyes and nodded. We still had no fucking clue of what was going on here. So when she lifted her good arm and pointed, we all turned to look. I say all of us because most of the platoon was watching at this point. I had been so transfixed I hadn't even seen the rest of the platoon come out to see what was up. 52 Marines spread out around the range were all standing in various states of unease. Some were standing there wide-eyed, a couple were crying, with bags. A few were just standing there, looking confused. I saw Bone Crusher standing there with a cup of coffee and an expression that was the physical embodiment of the phrase, "What the fuck?" But when she pointed, we all followed her finger. Even the corpsmen were able to break his concentration on her to see what she pointed at. Like I said, we all followed that finger. Except one of us. No, not him. Bag's crew chief found himself on the business end of that mangled finger. Might as well have been staring down the barrel of a loaded .50 cal. Bag's facial features twisted into a mask of anger I had never seen on that kid's face. I had never even seen this kid get annoyed. And he looked back to his wife, and she met his eyes and nodded. He nodded back. He leaned in and kissed her forehead. He pushed himself up to his feet. The air got downright frigid as he rose. He turned and glared at his crew chief, not saying a fucking word, just glaring. Now, maybe that idiot was still drunk. Maybe the gravity of the situation just didn't register in his mind. I don't know. But he said about the dumbest thing he could think of at that point. "Dude, she was a fucking stripper, you fucking boot. She wasn't really a person." Yeah, he said that dumbass shit. Bag's eyes got wide. He reached for the knife he kept on his chest of body armor. It was a Kaba fighting knife. They had been a staple of the Marine Corps armory since World War I or so. They are made for killing. Weird thing to notice, but I did. The Bag started towards his crew chief. His intentions were very clear at this point. The corpsman tried to reach out to him as he passed. Bags merely stiff-armed him, and Doc fell out of the way. Even if you hadn't been here for the last 5 minutes, just looking at Bags you could tell what he was about to do. I had to try and stop him. Not for the crew chief's sake. Fuck him. I just remember not wanting Bag to go to jail. I was trying to move towards him. Whatever it was that kept me from getting to the wife, kept me from getting to Bag. I reached for him and got close, but not close enough. "God damn it, Bags!" I roared at him. "Stop, motherfucker! You will go to the fucking brig!" He ignored me. He didn't care. He had shit to do. A few others yelled at him to back down. We were all on Bag's side on this, and none of us wanted him to get fried for murder. But none of us could move to stop him. All we could do was watch him commit murder. And sure, it was a murder. We would agree with this, of course. But one he could never get away with. And when he was arm's length from his crew chief, he squared up with him. "Dude," the crew chief sobbed. "You need to chill the fuck out." Bag reached out and grabbed him by the throat, protector of his body armor. He pulled him close and stabbed him in the belly, underneath his flank. I watched him twist the blade and yank as hard as he could sideways. His crew chief's face went white as a sheet, and the shock was evident. I had taught Bags that move during MCMAPs. It was surreal watching him demonstrate it on his crew chief. Of course, to be fair, the whole situation was a fucking horror show. I figured the only thing keeping the crew chief's guts in were his body armor, and that's when the screaming started. Bags threw his crew chief to the deck and started working at his face with a knife. We all sat frozen, watching Bag cut this guy's face off. One of the boots who had just got into the platoon the month prior vomited down the front of his chest. I noticed he had a Chili Mac MRE for breakfast. Bizarre thing to notice, but I did. The screaming turned to a gurgle, and eventually the gurgling stopped. Bags held up a fist full of meat that used to be a face and tossed it into the grass, as far away as he could. To this day, I don't understand why he did that. "What the fuck?" I heard Megatron gasp out. I found myself to be in agreement with that statement. I briefly wondered how anyone was going to explain this to the higher-ups. Megatron was going to have a lot to explain. Bag turned around slowly, looking at all of us, and I had never seen those eyes in his face. They were hard. His eyes were usually friendly, kind of dopey, but they were hard now. Well, I will admit he had just disemboweled somebody and cut their face off, and so it was pretty fucking understandable. He looked back to where he had left his wife, and she wasn't there anymore. He grunted and nodded to himself. Apparently, he was pretty pleased with that. He looked around at us again, all of us staring back in shock. He flicked his knife, slinging off bits of flesh and blood into the grass. He nodded at us again and jammed the knife into his own throat. "No, goddammit!" somebody yelled. Now that I think about it, it was probably the corpsman. He had, as far as he had known, 3 bodies on the deck, and he couldn't get to a single one of them. That must have been his own personal hell. Bag's eyes rolled back in his head, and he fell. I don't know if he died of blood loss or if he suffocated to death. Most likely, it was the blood loss. But as soon as his corpse stopped kicking, I could move again. I looked over at my section leader, and he shook his head and said, "I fucking hate this place." Wow. Absolutely chest pounding, something a little bit different there from the incredible mind of RevBlackRage over on Reddit. Huge thank you, Rev, for giving me a heads up on this one. Of course, as ever, I hope you enjoyed my rendition and really do look forward to much more of your work in the future. Guys and girls, you know the drill. Please, as ever, do let me know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help with the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid Crew. If you're an aspiring writer or would just like to have a crack at things like myself, please do get in touch with me at the usual email as on screen, which is dmtforestofear@gmail.com. I really look forward to hearing from you. Hope you've all had a fantastic week at work or studying, whatever it is that you do, and you're trying to keep fit and focused during these testing times. But above all, guys, remember, be safe, not sorry.